to Never Mind the Dambusters, the podcast that takes you beyond the myths, the movies and the legends of RAF Bomber Command. I'm Jane Gulliford-Lowes and I'm joined as ever by my co-host James Jeffries. Together we dig into the untold stories, the tough choices and the moral grey zones at the heart of one of the most powerful and controversial air forces of the Second World War. In each episode we go beyond the operations that changed history, discuss the people who took part, and uncover the strategies and innovations that reshaped the very nature of war. This isn't just about particular aircraft or missions, it's about politics, it's about people, and the lasting legacy of strategic bombing that still sparks debate today. So buckle up as we climb into the turbulent skies of history and discover why Bomber Command's story is far more complex, challenging, and fascinating than you might think. This week we're answering your questions, or at least attempting to, but it's been a while since we were in the recording studio, so let's have a catch up first. How are you, James, and how's your summer been?
It has been a while, hasn't it, actually? Yeah, because I've been away. I've been good. Today was the Clacton Air Show, and I took a photo that would probably win the crappiest aviation photo of 2025. Yeah, it is. I swear to God, it is a P-47 Thunderbolt, just this grey splurge in the distance that looks like a speck of dust. But I heard it coming from miles away, and a Spitfire flew over as well as the Red Arrows. So yeah, that was today. But what else have I been doing? So I was away in Cambridge for 4 weeks, teaching introductory module to the Second World War. Visited Bletchley Park, which is always amazing to go to. And I know I said this to you, but I read Robert Harris's Enigma. I bought it at Bletchley Park, and I forgot that it mentions mine laying. So that was kind of like, I forgot about that. Yeah. So yeah, that was a nice little moment. Where else did I go? I went to the US Cemetery at Cambridge, IWN Duxford, and London. But at Duxford, I saw the Blenheim twice, so that was obviously selfie moment. And I found out that I think someone had bought a £6,000 joyride in it. Because I saw it out on the runway and I thought, oh my goodness, it's going to fly. And I chatted to someone there and they said, no, it's not going to fly today, but it will tomorrow. Someone's paid, I think it was $6,000 to fly in it. So I know, just yeah, I mean, that's just petty cash, isn't it? I mean, that's, yeah. Gosh, well, now you know what I would do if I had that sort of money. But anyway, otherwise, yeah, I've got the Duxford Festival coming up. I'm speaking alongside Sarah Lou about Operation Manna and Exodus. So any listeners that are there that want to say hi, please feel free to. I also went to Paris, which was beautiful, saw all the sights. That was with work, so I didn't get to do a lot of sightseeing on my own. I did wait by the Arc de Triomphe for a Bristol Beaufighter to fly by, but it didn't show up. Those that know.
Yeah.
I was on BBC Essex earlier in the week talking about the Dambusters. And a little bit about the pod as well, which was good fun. First live radio broadcast that I've ever done. And I'm going to be on a documentary talking about someone's father who was in Bomber Command and Coastal Command during the Battle of Britain. Bomber Command and Fighter Command during the Battle of Britain. So watch this space. And yeah, now it's back to all of this. And of course, I've got the PhD and the Augsburg book to go back and write. And I've done plenty of reading as well. So yeah, that's it. That's quite a lot actually, but it has been quite a while. But how are you, Jane? You went on a mad road trip to Norway, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Who on earth would drive from County Durham to Norway? Yeah, that was me. It was fantastic actually. The journey was extremely long. Went via Newcastle to Amsterdam, then we drove up from Amsterdam all the way up through Netherlands, Northern Germany, into Denmark, and then over the big road bridge to Sweden. But the highlight of the journey for me was crossing over all the famous minefields around the Danish and German coasts. Went over the Dortmund-Ems Canal, went over the Kiel Canal, which is absolutely massive. It's huge. It's so impressive. And then I drove over the bridges which cross over the belts and sounds and stuff, and I was going, nasturtiums and onions and all this kind of thing. And of course we ended up quite close to the Oslo Fjord as well, where more minelaying took place. So yeah, all in all, it was a very long but yeah, good journey. And Pippin had an absolute whale of a time, of course. One day we went down to a little town called Rakkestad, which is quite close to where the house is. And there is a fantastic little resistance museum there. Now, looking at it from the outside, it just looks like a large shed basically. But when you actually go in, it is enormous. It's actually got 3 floors and it's just full of stuff. And the young guy who was showing us around, he was absolutely brilliant. He was so knowledgeable. So I found out that there was actually loads of resistance and SOE activity, just like right where the house is, and that there were regular SOE drops in the lake just up the way, just it's about half a mile from where we are. So all that's going on around there, and there were also escape routes through the forests where the house is, from Oslo up to the Swedish border. So you can hike from where we are to the Swedish border in about 8 hours, in theory. So yeah, there was lots of interesting tales. And I also got talking to the neighbour who lives on the farm down the street, Jan, and he was telling us that his father was in the RAF during the war. Well, Royal Norwegian Air Force. He trained in Canada at the big Norwegian training camp there, Lille Norge, after which my house is named. And then he joined 331 and 332, which were the Norwegian fighter squadrons. And he'd been based up in the north of Scotland initially, but then he'd been deployed with 2nd Tactical Air Force, I think, in the Normandy campaign. Would that be right? Yeah. But poor guy suffered really severe PTSD during Normandy and was never the same again, basically, which is very, very sad. But yeah, Jan had all his papers and everything. So he was a mechanic. He was working on like Spitfires or Hurricanes or whatever. But he's got all of his papers and loads of photographs. He's got his Legion d'Honneur and his medals and all this kind of thing. So that was fantastic. I've actually got one of the Norwegian sort of homemade newspapers from the Lille Norge camp in Canada from 1944. And he's actually got the first 2 editions. It's just like a typewritten news sheet kind of thing. So yeah, we were sitting chatting for ages to them. They were absolutely brilliant, lovely, lovely people. So yeah, so that was great. Brilliant trip. Took forever to get there, took forever to get back. Really enjoyed it though. And now I'm back at work and back to reality. I did get some work done on the Norwegian book though, the British Commando raids in Norway. I got a bit done on there, so I think I'm probably about a quarter of the way through that now. But I hadn't touched it for months. I've just been too busy with work and doing the podcast, so I'm determined to get back into it. And on that note, I'm actually doing something for World War II TV this coming Thursday, the 28th of August, about that very subject, about Operation Claymore and the Lofoten Commando raids. So that'll be on, I think it's on at 7 UK time if you fancy tuning into the wonderful Paul Woodidge's show to talk about that. Coming up, what have I got coming up? I'll be at We Have Ways Fest on the 12th, 13th of September, so do come along and say hello there. I'm doing something. It's not a talk as such, but I can't reveal the exact details as yet, but we'll see.
I know what it is.
You know what it is, yeah. It all will be revealed.
Top secret.
Yeah, all will be revealed in due course. So yeah, looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing everybody again. And I have to say, there's quite a lot of the usual crowd aren't going this year, for whatever reason. So
I'm not going.
I know you're not going. Yeah, you'll be big.
Sadly, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a few people.
Yeah, next year.
But we'll see anyway. Yeah. It's always a good laugh, though, a good weekend. So I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. Anyway, definitely. Shall we press on with the listeners' questions?
Yes. And I mean, a big thanks, firstly, to everyone who sent in their questions. Some we've got that were from a while back, I believe. And we've got some that are pretty testing as well, which I always love these. So we got the first one here from, I've got to make sure I say this correctly, so I do apologize if I don't, Ivan Savanovets via email. And this was actually sent in June, so apologies for the delay, Ivan. But the question is, did all of the bomber aircraft always need to have a full complement of crew before each mission? So, for example, did each Lancaster always have 7 crew members on each mission? Was it possible for replacements to be available if 1 or 2 crew members were unavailable? I mean, the short answer is yes. But Jane, do you want to answer this first and I'll chip in, or?
Yeah, I can do. So, yes, if you are flying operationally, so therefore on a bombing raid, on a mining operation or whatever, you would always have a full complement of crew. So you've got to bear in mind that these bombers have a specified number of crew positions and crew roles for a reason, and every crew member is essential to the safe operational flying of that aircraft. Okay? So you've got a flight engineer for a reason. You've got a navigator for a reason. You've got gunners for a reason. They're all undertaking quite sort of distinct roles, really, all of which are absolutely essential. So you cannot undertake a bombing operation without your bomb aimer. You cannot undertake a bombing operation without your wireless operator. And you certainly can't undertake any of these without a pilot. Although, having said that, the flight engineer is often trained to be able to fly the aircraft in the event that anything happens to the pilot. And in some cases, you would also have crew members who've also had some pilot training as well who can take over. Like, for example, in my uncle's crew, where the tail gunner had actually previously trained as a pilot, but failed his training, but was available in emergencies. So yes, the answer is every one of those men were vital to the functioning and the safety. That's the important thing, the safety of the aircraft, and they each had an important role to perform. In speaking to sort of veterans, some of the things that they've said, I'm thinking about, and when I was talking to Tom Davidson as well, it was that you had complete trust in the other members of your crew to perform their role to the best of their ability, and you put your trust in them, and your life was dependent on them and theirs on you as well. So, so that's basically the answer, Ivan. Yeah, it was absolutely essential. An operational crew would not take off on an operation without a full complement of crew. It just wouldn't happen. Mm. You would have a replacement if someone was ill. It often happened, or got injured. There was a kind of a pool, if you like, of what's called spare bods, who would be allocated to aircraft where there was a shortage of a person. Sometimes as well, we should bear in mind that you also had 8 people on board, because you would have what's called a second dicky pilot, who was often just someone new who was just flying for some operational experience, who would usually do 2 ops as a sort of second pilot on a bomber, just to basically find out what happens and, see what it's like flying operationally. And the amount of aircraft that crashed with second pilots on board is just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Not particularly because they were there, it's just the statistics. There were so many men killed that way. And sometimes as well, you would maybe have an additional important person, such as, I don't know, a group captain or somebody like that who's, coming on for the ride. Sometimes journalists as well. Yeah. And also SOE agents who would be dropped in appropriate places. I know Halifax did undertake a lot of these SOE drops. And they had a particular, some of them were fitted with this particular sort of chute that you could just drop people down for this specific purpose. So yeah, I would say at least 7 on board. Generally 7, but sometimes more than 7. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered it, but I was just, the second dicky topic, Patrick Doorhill flew with John Nettleton in the Augsburg raid as second dicky. He survived, and there's a very good interview with him talking about the raid, because he was, I wouldn't say so much in a passenger seat, he still had things to do, but he was observing, and his account is very, very interesting because he's taking in a lot. And yeah, you would have these people gaining experience. You had, as you mentioned, the guests on board. Sometimes people would sneak people on as well for joy rides or on a mission, and sometimes
they took their
and often not reported, so we don't actually know how many people did do that. Not suggesting it was thousands, but yeah, there's some that we won't know about. Yeah. And you mentioned the journalists. You've got recordings, haven't you, of journalists reporting on raids, which are absolutely fascinating. If people haven't heard them before, do track them down, and we've shared some links and stuff. Sometimes you would have less crew on missions in exceptional circumstances. I am thinking of things like Tall Boys, where you would lose a gunner, so 6179 Squadron, you would lose a crew member because of the weight, etc. And on the note of replacements, you had the pool, and it was, crews didn't want to do that. That was bad luck. That was seen as bad luck if you had to have someone different replacing. If someone had a tummy bug and they had to be replaced or they were wounded or whatever, and you had someone come in, there was a lot of awkward feeling about, oh goodness, because of that tight knitness that you would have with a crew, someone new coming in. I don't know how I feel about this wireless operator. They would have been trained. You would have faith in that sense, but they still weren't, Jim or Alan,
and you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That poor Rory from my uncle's crew was killed doing just that. He volunteered to go up as a spare bod one night, just on the basis that he would get an extra up under his belt, would finish earlier. And he was killed. Awful.
Gosh. And actually, in the film Appointment in London, Bogart, I should say, flies as a second Dickie technically on that raid, and he's observing, isn't he? He replaces the American guy on it, and so it's in films, and actually in Journey Together, Richard Attenborough's character is in the replacement pool when he comes in, on that crew, which is flown by Jack Watling. I can't remember what the character names are. I know the actor's name. Yeah. So it's in popular culture as well. If you track it down, there are examples of it. And of course, other exceptions for there being less crew members are with Operation Manor, for example, bringing back POWs. You would get rid of the gunners and a couple of other people just for the extra weight, so that you could bring back a few more POWs. So yeah, there are exceptions, and it was different, etc. But yeah, there are caveats to all of the examples for some reason, but generally you would have your full crew on your aircraft.
Yeah, they're there for a reason. Yeah. Right, we'll move on to our next question then. This is from David Wookie, and he says, what do we know about Operation Dodge? His uncle took part. He actually emailed some photographs as well, which I'll try and put up on our social media at some point. So what do we know about Operation Dodge? Well, this kind of links into what we've been talking about in earlier episodes about Operation Exodus as well. So do you want to start off with this one, James?
Yeah, essentially it is the Mediterranean version of Exodus, isn't it? I think I said Manor instead of Exodus in the last question, actually. But anyway, I did, didn't I? So there you go. It's easy to. It's because I've been talking about them at the same time for this IWN talk. I must make sure I'm on that. It's Mediterranean version of this, getting POWs back. And one example I wanted to include was, and there's an excellent piece on the International Bomber Command Centre website. There's another plug for you, Dan, listening, I'm sure you are, of Lancaster PA 278 from 103 Squadron, which disappeared on the 4th of October 1945. It was believed that the aircraft was struck by lightning or suffered engine failure at 4:40 a.m. as it headed towards Corsica. Apparently there was a bright flash of light. And the aircraft was carrying more people than it should have done. So it had 25 people instead of the maximum of 20. And it included 19 nursing staff. And it has the stat of being the biggest single loss of female service personnel in an instance during the Second World War. And there were no wreck or bodies found from it. So yeah, it's horrible, isn't it?
That's absolutely terrible. I've also found a nice little account of what it was actually like to fly on Operation Dodge. This is on the World War II People's War website on the BBC. This is by Richard Grattan. So he says that after the European and Far Eastern hostilities were finished, an interesting operation called Operation Dodge was instigated. This was the means of using a huge fleet of Lancaster bombers and the attendant aircrews, who were now out of a job in effect, to transport soldiers of the 8th Army back home from holding units in Italy, especially those who'd been away from home for 4 to 5 years. Because remember, many of these guys had been in North Africa before they ended up in Italy. So the pickup points in Italy were Bari on the southeast coast, and the second one was Pomigliano near Naples and close to Vesuvius. So Richard says, my first trip out was on August 22nd, 1945 to Bari, whilst with 44 Squadron with Chalky White's crew. If your surname's White, you can guarantee that your nickname is going to be Chalky, isn't it? Yeah. On September the 9th, there was a second try with my own crew, skipped by George Newman. This was an exercise to take back to Italy 20 Italian POWs, so they were going the other way, who were mostly walking wounded, destined for Bari, going the long way around to avoid the mountains in view of the oxygen supply being restricted to the aircrew only. However, having reached France, we had mechanical trouble with the aircraft and had to return back to the emergency landing strip at Woodbridge in Suffolk. Bet those lads were as sick as chips. As the third trip out on October 8th was to Pomigliano, near Naples, with Mount Vesuvius on the landing circuit, which looked quite menacing, as at that time clouds of smoke were still being given out after the major eruption in 1944. The day after the landing was considered a rest day, was spent visiting the ruins of Pompeii, of course, which at the time was considered a great experience and not to be missed. My fourth and fifth trips out to Bari were non-eventful. We were issued with khaki drill. We used to change from blue to khaki whilst airborne. The transit camp at Bari was rough and inhospitable, so we usually found a room in the officers' club in the town. Those trips were like having a free holiday with swimming in the Adriatic Sea, lazing about and eating good food. My sixth and final trip was on November the 20th when the weather was changing. This was a little different as we had mechanical trouble with the aircraft on the way out and we diverted to Istres in central France. We were carrying a spare Merlin engine in the bomb bay for a stranded aircraft in Bari, but it was fitted to our own aircraft, and after 3 days we again passed on to Bari. On each occasion we returned with 20 soldier passengers on board who were delighted to be going home. In a few hours instead of a few weeks by sea, regardless of the discomfort, noise of 4 Merlins, sometimes air sickness. So the aircraft specially built to carry bombs and destroy cities were at the last used for a more humanitarian reason, and the aircrew who flew in them were given a pleasant job to carry out and at the same time have a mini holiday. It was a very rewarding experience and a memory to cherish. As a matter of interest to the modern traveller, the trip out to Bari was 14 to 15 hours, much different to today's travel by jet liner. That's a lovely account.
Wow.
Nice to hear a sort of
wonderful,
a positive and an upbeat thing in connection with Bomber Command instead of the usual kind of stories that we deal with.
Yeah, I absolutely love that.
That was nice.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it gives a nice picture of what was going on, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's covered Dodge, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Hopefully. So our next question from Stephen Westwood is a provocative question for you. I like it already. To consider for your Q&A, but one that hopefully leads to some interesting discussion. I would be interested in your opinion of Air Vice Marshal Don Bennett's contention in the final paragraph of Chapter 8 of his autobiography, Pathfinder, that, when used in long-distance Boeing raids into Germany, 1 Mosquito was equivalent in effectiveness value in the role to 7 Lancasters. He gives his reasoning, and while I think his tongue was slightly in his cheek when he wrote it, and it involves some apple versus oranges data comparison, he makes some valid points as well. Also, using this logic as a follow-up question, what would the Lancaster versus Halifax ratio be? Oh, Halifax versus Lancaster. Oh, here we go. So I think the best thing here is to quote that passage that Bennett wrote. And I quote, "The experts on the air staff who turned down the Mosquito as a type in the early days might be interested in the argument that subsequently became current to the effect that 1 Mosquito was worth 7 Lancasters. For those mathematically minded, here is the exercise. A Mosquito carried a little over half the bomb load of a Lancaster to Berlin. Its casualty rate was about 1/10 of that of the Lancaster. Its cost was 1/3 of the Lancaster, and it carried 2 people in its crew instead of 7. Personally, I think it is a little hard to get an exact mathematical result from that set of figures, but it is quite clear that value for war effort was certainly well on the side of the Mosquito compared with any other aircraft ever produced in the history of flying." I mean, yeah, that's quite a paragraph. That's quite a statement. And I agree. It's apples and oranges a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think I love the Mosquito. I think it's an incredible aircraft. I love the Lancaster as well. But I think that there's smaller points you could say here is obviously a Mosquito couldn't carry a tall boy. It would find the payload very, very difficult in some respects. Could it be used for the humanitarian aspects as well that we've talked about? So including, dropping food and picking up POWs? No. I know we're talking about this point in the war. The Lancaster does have this giant adaptable bomb bay, which is to its credit, especially compared to other aircraft. You would also need to, you might be less 5 crew members, but you need a lot more pilots to match the bomb load there. And a pilot is harder to train. That's not putting down the other trades at all. They all had to learn their trade, but the pilot is the one that does take the longest and is the more effort to do. So I think that's got to be put into consideration as well. Also, I think once the Mosquito's genuinely proven itself, and again, this is up for debate, we're talking late 43. So if you're going to start turning Bomber Command to Mosquitoes, you're looking at early 44. And I think by that point, the tide has turned. Do you really want to change all of the factories, all of the infrastructure, all of the tools into one bomber that actually can't do everything that the Lancaster can do? And that's going to come at cost. That's going to take time. The war will probably be over by the time you've done that. I don't know. I mean, people are probably like shouting at their radio now, whatever they listen this through. How old am I? Obviously, radio, wireless set, whatever. Yeah, I don't really see it. I can see the argument, but I can't say I'm fully convinced. And I'm more down the avenue of it's apples and oranges. I mean, I don't know what you think, Jane, about this.
I agree. It's horses for courses, isn't it? Yeah, the Mosquito was a magnificent bomber, but it was magnificent in the jobs and roles that it performed. It's never going to be able to replace a heavy bomber. It's not for that. And as you say, you know, it's I'm struggling here because you just can't compare the two. The better comparison, as he's mentioned, will be between a Lancaster and a Halifax. But again, that depends about the stage that you are talking about and about the models,
absolutely,
marks of aircraft that you are talking about. If you are talking about a Mark II, a late Mark II Halifax, late 43, very early 44, against the Lancaster, there is no competition. The Lancaster wins hands down, which is why the Mark II Halifaxes were actually withdrawn from bombing raids over Germany in the early part of 44 because the losses were so high. If you then compare the Mark III Halifax with its new Bristol Hercules engines to the Lancaster, so the Mark III and the later Marks, there's very little difference between a Lancaster and a Halifax in terms of operational flying. Lancaster's got slightly higher ceiling, I think, slightly bigger bomb capability. They can both undertake mine-laying ops, as could the Mosquito, I have to say. Every bomber that was utilised by Bomber Command was adapted to carry out mine-laying ops, which is another one of my bugbears. Again, that shows how important it was, but anyway, that's another question. So yeah, I think this whole Mosquito versus Lancaster thing it's a false argument as far as I'm concerned. But
I don't think so.
Have a different view. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're entitled to it. It's perfectly fair, and I'd agree with you that the Mark III Halifax is an incredible bomber. I would say it's almost on a par with the Lancaster.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You know, but of course, when it comes in, the Bomber Command's geared to Lancasters, and you know Harris has made his mind up, and it is later on. You know.
Yeah, and people tend to think that there were many, many more Lancasters produced than Halifaxes. There weren't. There was about 1,000 more Lancasters produced. I think it was about 7,500 Lancasters as about against about 6,500 Halifaxes. So the difference wasn't that massive. But yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other can of worms, shall we say? Right, shall we go on to the next question? This one is from regular contributor and friend of the show, Jamie Heffer. Hello, Jamie. Jamie asks,
hey, Jamie.
Were Bomber Command crews briefed on the types of air-sea rescue equipment that would or could be dropped to them by Coastal Command air-sea rescue aircraft in the event of them having to ditch in the sea?
I've got a very quick answer to this, which is yes. Much like other facets of information that they would have had to have known, there were plenty of lectures. There were lots of lectures and lots of subjects which would have included air-sea rescue, how to use the equipment, how it works. I would say that got better as the war progressed. Certainly at the start of the war, it wasn't a very, very good system at all. And it was something that the RAF was very much found lacking. And any historian of the Battle of Britain, as an example, will see that fighter pilots generally had to be picked up by fishing vessels or by luck of any naval vessels going through, where the Germans had sea rescue planes, specials boats, etc., etc. But that does change as the war cottons on, as the bombing campaign steps up. There is this need for, we need a rescue service, etc. And then that would transcribe to there being lectures and crews being informed of this. That's the only answer really I can give to this. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Jane.
As far as I can gather, it was very much classroom based rather than any practical live training like you would get now, where you would be doing exercises, at sea kind of thing. Obviously, it just didn't happen during the war. But I suspect that there was, giving dinghies to practice, how to get in and out of and all this sort of thing in the classroom, that sort of thing. But beyond that, I'm not sure that there was anything, any great amount of training.
Yeah. Well, there we go.
That was brief to the point, yeah.
That's it, yeah. Always me, isn't it? That's why I'm again.
Yeah.
There is a script, folks. I do promise this. It's just because it's me and my ways. Right, so next up is a question from Daniel Richards, who guested on our last episode, actually. So, yeah, thank you for submitting this. Daniel says, would Leonard Cheshire have been able to lead and create 617 Squadron on the Dams raid like Gibson did? Okay, I'm gonna answer this first because I recently read the brilliant Richard Morris's biography on Leonard Cheshire. So this is quite fresh in my mind. So on paper, yes, he theoretically could have done, but there are some things going on backstage and a little bit of politics and such. So Gibson was always the first choice when it came to the Dams raid. I think, he'd just finished his tour. He was a bit of a favourite of Cochrane, leader of Five Group, and Arthur Harris. And I'd argue at this point, he had more of a portfolio than Cheshire. That's not to say that Cheshire hadn't done a lot at this point, but Gibson is probably more prominent there. Cheshire's interest in 617 Squadron came when he had finished a tour, and he heard in July that Gibson was leaving 617 Squadron and they're looking for a new CO. And Gibson actually flies to Scampton to speak to the station commander, Charles Whitworth, and he's basically told, you're too much for Cochrane to stomach. Basically, you're too flighty, you're too opinionated. But he says, but I'm saying this in a good way. You're just not a right fix for 617 Squadron, and Cochrane won't like you to be leading 617. And then he's told, actually, we found someone else in George Holden, who becomes the CO of 617 Squadron. Cheshire's a bit annoyed. He goes off. He's flown specially to the station to put his name forward. Okay, well, I didn't get that. So. In that time, subsequently, George Holden is CO, but he's killed on the now infamous raid on the Dortmund-Ems Canal, which is a complete disaster. And some names from the Dams raid are killed, including Knight. He's killed during this raid. As I say, it's an absolute tragic attempt to bomb the canals. And Mick Martin, who was in the Dams raid, chastised, takes over as CO, but it's basically something of on lease basis. He isn't really seen as the long-term commander. He's just taking it over at the moment because he's there and he's able to do it, and he does a great job. At the same time, Cheshire has just snubbed a staff job because he wants to carry on flying and he hates the idea of just constantly saluting and being called sir all the time. He wants to be on an active station, etc. Cochrane gets wind of this, and the Cheshire is kicking about, basically just said no to this staff job, and invites him to an interview. So Cochrane is clearly keen on Cheshire. What has been said before by Whitworth is clearly nonsense. And Whitworth is though still worried that Cheshire is going to be opinionated, and this is complete nonsense. Cheshire breezes the interview and is given the job straight away. So that's kind of like, there is a little bit of politics behind it. So an individual like Whitworth wasn't keen on Cheshire. Cochrane was, but I don't think for the Dams raid there was any other choice other than Gibson. That was kind of like a no-brainer. That's who was wanted. But it does make you think that if Cheshire had been CO and made CO in July 43, he could well have been killed on that Dortmund-Ems Canal, and instead of George Holden, and that could have been the end of him. So I hope that's kind of a long-winded way of me saying I don't think he would have been in then. He could have been slightly afterwards, but fate chose otherwise, and he came in when he did. And I mean, the rest is history, as they say. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'll go with that. Yeah, my answer would be on paper. Yeah, on paper, in theory, yes. But
yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's the whole sort of Gibson personality thing, isn't it? There's almost this cult of personality which is growing up around Gibson. And as you say, he was the first and only choice to lead the Dams raid.
Yeah.
Would you say he was the better flyer than Cheshire?
That's a really tough question. I mean, both of them were incredible pilots. Both could handle heavy bombers at low level. And Cheshire, I'd say his golden period is when he is with 617 Squadron, or when he's, diving down. I mean, he flies a Mustang as well as a Mosquito and Lancasters, and he's dropping flares at low level. He's an incredible pilot. But so was Gibson. He was flying at low level, the Dams raid, and in other instances. So I don't think you could really compare them. They were both incredible pilots.
Gibson had been Gibson had been flying at very low level from April 40 because he was doing mine laying.
Yeah.
He was on the very first mine laying ops then. I think he did 10. Low level flying was essential to those operations, and it was certainly nothing new to him at all.
Yeah. Well, this is just the fallacy that, 617 Squadron, and they were the low flying specialists. It's like you go to any squadron in Bomber Command, they're all doing low flying. It's the same with Augsburg, 44 Squadron 97. I know it's 5 group again, but, they'd been doing low flying, doing mine laying and other ops and training and such like. So I count that as a bit of a fallacy that 617 Squadron were the low flying specialists.
It's all part of what we're talking about with Dan, isn't it? This whole sort of myth that's arisen around the Dambusters story and what have you. But that's
absolutely. But I mean, you asked me who's a better pilot. Who would I have wanted to have met and had a beer with? Without a shadow of a doubt, Cheshire, because his story afterwards is just, I've got so many questions for him. Not to say I wouldn't with Gibson. And I just imagine him to be just fascinating, interesting company and such like. It's strange having this idea that he was opinionated and such like, because that never has come across in my reading about him. I don't know where Whitworth got this from about Cheshire. It's quite bizarre, actually. But anyway, yeah.
Right, let's move on then. So on Facebook, James McNeil, hello James, says, I vaguely recall that the RAF used B-17s before the US entered the war, and that Coastal Command also used them. Do you know why the RAF didn't use them or appear not to have used B-17s in the bombing offensive? Was it about availability, perhaps?
So this is me again. Sorry, folks. I'm going to go off on one again. I nearly did this as a talk for History Indoors a number of years back when I was doing History Indoors, because it's got a very, very fascinating topic. And yes, Bomber Command did use them, and they did use them for bombing raids in the bombing offensive. Probably most famously with 100 Group, so Bomber Support Group, Electronic Warfare. When we had Stuart on, he was talking about this. They use fortresses, but this is a lot later in the war. So this is 214 Squadron from January 44 and 223 from April 45. As James mentioned, Coastal Command used them. There were 2 meteorological squadrons, an air sea rescue squadron and an anti-submarine squadron. But in 1941, 20 were initially used by Bomber Command. So these are B-17Cs, so quite the earlier ones, not the ones that you would have seen the 8th Air Force use, slightly earlier design. And it was just designated the Fortress 1. And they went to 90 Squadron with more to follow. So these initial 20. And the first combat mission was on the 8th of July, 1941, high altitude in daylight. And this is on German naval base Wilhelmshaven. And by the 12th of September, the 90 Squadron had carried out 22 raids involving 39 sorties with fortresses. Of these, 18 had been aborted. 2 had bombed secondary targets, and 19 had bombed their primary targets. So it's a mixed bag when it comes to results, about 50-50 in terms of them actually bombing and those being aborted. 2 aircraft were shot down and 2 more crashed on landing in that period. In all, 8 of the 20 aircraft were lost in 2 months, and the fortresses were withdrawn from flying operations over Europe. The RAF had kind of been sceptical of the Fortress. They'd heard all the big things from the Americans, the whole pickle barrel and all this sort of stuff, and that it was an amazing aircraft, and it is, but they didn't think that it was really suitable for daylight bombing, and they'd already from practical experience known that flying in daylight with heavy bombers is not a good thing to do. It does result in heavy losses. It's not practical, etc. The Americans counter-argued this, and of course later on when they do use their forts, you have the box formations, you have all the guns on the B-17s. And the Americans pointed out the RAF weren't using them the way that they should have been. They were at the wrong height. They were flying far too high. They were overloaded. They also pointed out that they went out in small groups without all of the guns that they should have done. They weren't in the big box formations. But the RAF were going, okay, no, they didn't really work out for us, and they decided not to pursue it. And I mean, by that point, late 41 into 42, you are starting to get the heavier bombers coming in and being used. You got the Lanc on the way as well. But yeah, the RAF received the 20 Fortress 1s, 19 Fortress 2s, and 85 Fortress 3s. But essentially, yeah, they tried it, they used it, they thought, yeah, this doesn't live up to the expectations the Americans said. And really, for what we want, it doesn't quite work. So that's a potted history, really, of where you are with the fortresses and the Royal Air Force. But very, very useful with 100 Group and Coastal Command. Although I would say, they use the Liberator and other bombers as well in roles. But yeah, there you go.
And Coastal Command basically had to use whatever they could get their hands on, didn't they? So they didn't have a lot of choice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, poor old Coastal Command. Right, what's next? Oh, yeah. Are you going to ask this next one?
Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
So, from a Bomber Command historian on Blue Sky, given Churchill's about face after the Dresden raid, what do you think Bomber Command's role would have been if the war in Europe had continued longer? I better let you start on this because I've been yabbering for ages.
I'm giving a heavy sigh here because I always find these counterfactuals and what ifs really, really difficult to answer because it didn't happen and they didn't have to continue. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I think they would have been sort of continuing along the route that they were taking in sort of late March, early April. So still continuing with mining, attacking transport targets, might be more focus on sort of power and fuel and the petrol industry, that sort of thing. It's so difficult to say. I mean, obviously, how much say are the Russians going to have as well? Are they going to be, saying, well, we want you to do this, that and the other, blah, blah, blah. We want you to bomb here, bomb there. I think it's very difficult to say, but certainly Churchill is distancing himself from Bomber Command at this point in time after Dresden. So maybe he would have decided that, ultimately that they had already had their day. Who knows? I think it's one of those questions that's just impossible to answer, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the what ifs, the counterfactuals are always difficult to answer. I think you've summed it up. I think there would have been a continuation of the oil campaign, the transportation campaign, definitely. And I think would cities have still been bombed? It's hard to say, really. I mean, you look at what Bomber Command was doing. They bombed Butcher's Garden, and I've said that wrong, I've like Butcher's Garden. And such like, it would have been similar operations. I don't think it would have been very different to what you see after February 45. It just would have been a continuation of that.
Targets, because it's pointless keep bombing Essen when like Essen is completely flattened. So, and mind you, that didn't stop.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah. They might have, switched to different cities and towns because there were some that were relatively unscathed, even by that point in time still. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those that it's really difficult to say, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I don't think I've got anything else to add to that, really.
No. Well, I think we are just about running out of time anyway. So we've got some more questions that we haven't answered yet. But if we do answer these questions, we will be here for about the next 3 hours. So I think what we will do is we will save some of the questions, and we've been sent some other ones too just this evening. So we'll save those for another Q&A session at some point in time. So thank you everyone who sent those in. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Absolutely. Pip. Yeah. That's our signal to end. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. Your support, as ever, means so much to us. We are recording another Q&A soon. We've just had some fresh questions in, as Jayla said. So if you do have a question or we've touched something today, any topic you'd like us to tackle, do get in touch. You'll find all the ways to reach us in the show notes, whether that's via social media, email, or the link provided. If you've been enjoying the podcast, one of the best ways you can help us is by leaving a quick rating or review on your preferred podcast platform. It only takes a moment, but it really does help new listeners discover Never Mind the Dambusters.
And apologies for the dog barking in the background, but let's face it, it wouldn't be Never Mind the Dambusters without Pippin's contribution, would it? So, and if you'd like to go a step further, you can support the show for as little as £2.40 or $3 a month. It's a small contribution that makes a massive difference. Just follow the link in the show notes or visit nevermindthedambusters.buzzsprout.com. We'd also love to continue the conversation with you. Join our Facebook group or follow us on social media to stay connected. Thanks again for listening, and especially to all of our new listeners far and wide. I know we've had listeners from all over Europe. Got some new listeners in Greece. Hello to Lucas in particular, whose email I will reply to shortly. And thank you again for listening, everyone. We'll be back again next week with more stories from the skies of history. And until then, take care and goodbye.